Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good, from science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle, the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Rafe, and, today's a great day because it's a great Tuesday. Tuesdays are podcast days, and that means that if you are one of the privileged few, you will be out there listening to the Buff this week, and that would make you part of the set of the world's greatest listeners who have made us a global top 10% podcast. As usual, feel free to reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. Share the love, share the buff, give us a 5-star review, hit a smiley star, a subscribe button, a like. If you do things on your end, we will do the equivalent things on our end, and we will make your listening time worthwhile. Tell a friend to listen, and you will get a free episode. And buried in the show notes somewhere is a place where you can buy me a coffee. Today should be, what do they call them? The gods of scheduling and calendars. If they agree, it will be the last Buff episode prior to the celebration of the United States 250th birthday, the U.S.'s semi-quincentennial. Semi-quince means half of 500, I guess. Semi-quincentennial is half of 500. It will be 250 years since the official dating and signing of the Declaration of Independence, which is by most acts considered the founding document of these United States. And, we're not going to go into the entire history of the nation here. We will discuss, we're going to discuss this Declaration of Independence. And we've done things like this in the past, although I figured it was time to do it again because these things matter. So I have in front of me a transcription of the Declaration of Independence I pulled off from the National Archives. And we will read through this, and I will stop on occasion to point out some things that are probably relevant here. And it's interesting to me to think about what the consequence of this document, the consequences are, or were, and are, and will be. It is a letter to the world that says that we are breaking up with you, meaning we, these 13 united colonies, these colonies that are united here in America. There are 13 of them, and they have decided that they are going to break up with Great Britain, and then they provide all the reasons thereof. And it's not really it's not you, it's me. The issue is it's you. And there's a list of grievances, I guess you could put them, a list of reasons that are put forth, and why the colonies are sick of doing this whole doing the deal with the motherland that is across several weeks worth of sailing in each direction. It is a thing we can't do it anymore. It's not you, it's me, and the U.S. is breaking up. So it is an interesting letter. It is a masterclass in providing evidence to the world as why we are splitting up. So we're gonna go through this, and there's a couple of things I learned as I was rereading this again for the zillionth time. So I made some notes along the way of things that are important, and I've contemplated putting some sort of rah-rah USA kind of music in the background as we do this, but I don't think I will. But I may get moved when I do the editing to put that in there. So if it's in there, then I have succumbed to that. In Congress, July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. I'm going to stop here because it says the 13 United States of America, and United is lowercased. States of America is uppercased. The colonies, as they were, considered themselves states at this point. They viewed themselves as we should all be 13 independent little things, and we're not one nation. In fact, it's interesting. After this happened, and even after the Revolutionary War, the term United States was never used. It was the United States are, because they were considered plural. They were all separate and equal kinds of things. And there's a whole bunch of things on the Articles of Confederation. We'll talk a little bit about that afterwards, and the Constitutional Convention and the Constitution of 1789. So that's a topic for a different day. But note that as of July of 1776, these 13 United States of America, states is capitalized, so is America, but United is still lowercase. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So declaring the causes is going to be the list of reasons why we are breaking up. It is telling, I think, that they lay out reasons. When in the course of human events, basically they're saying every now and then, in the history of the world, things happen when people need to dissolve political bands between themselves and others. But they are laying out here, the drafters and the signers of this document, that they are going to consider both the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God. So they are taking the idea of what we would probably call natural philosophy. Back then, the laws of nature, we're going to follow the rules that we have seen in front of us, and we're also going to follow a moral law, the laws of nature's God. And it's interesting to me that these things are considered separate and equal stations. So these are separate things, this law of nature and the law of nature's God. These are separate and equal stations. They both matter. You can't just follow the rules of Earth and not think about the other realm, and you can't just apply the other realm and ignore what's happening here on the planet. You have to have separate and equal stations to both of those things. And what's interesting to me is this verb here, entitle, the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. So we are entitled to this by these laws, and therefore we're going to do them. We're not compelled by them. We are entitled to them, and we are going to tell you this because we have a decent respect to the opinions of mankind. So here's why we are doing what we are doing. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay, what are the truths? Here they come. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So those are the rights, or the truths that are self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with rights. Governments are set up amongst men to secure the rights, and they derive their powers from the consent of the government of the governed. And whenever any form of these governments becomes destructive, the people must slough them off, must shed them, and get a new government that will make them safe and happy. So and this is pretty standard Enlightenment thinking along the time. This is kind of a summary of the philosophy of the time and the nature of how men, being civilizations, how people get along, and what they should do, and why we should have government. And it's interesting to me that the government's, the purpose of the government is to secure the rights, is to make sure the rights are met. Notice that these rights come from the Creator, and the government's job is to secure them. And so if people are being deprived of their rights, it is the government's job to make sure that they are returned to them and secured. So that's the founding principle, and that is the thing that a lot of times results in difficulty. But those are the self-evident truths upon which the following is based. They continue. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So, yeah, sometimes things get bad, and people will suffer them, and it's hard to throw off something that's been around for a long time. And this is kind of a Chesterton fence kind of thing, is before you pull up the fence, you ought to know why it was put there. So the government that the colonies were under was, was colonial government with the basis there in Great Britain. King George III was the guy in charge. But this was a long-standing, British government goes back a long time prior to the American Revolution. And so they're recognizing that this is a thing that we're not going to do lightly. And sometimes it's okay to have to suffer these things while you try to figure out how to get yourself right. But they continue. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. So this has gone on long enough. We have a long train of these things. And not only is it our right to do this, we must do this. We are called, this is a duty thing. And this is the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God kind of thing going on here. And both of these things are in play. It is their duty to throw off such a government because it has become absolute despotism. Now, I think a little bit of this is hyperbolic, but that's how it is when you're breaking up. You get a little bit hyperbolic, and they are doing that. And some of the grievances that will follow will be, they'll be listed, and they'll seem a little bit over the top. But this is how you write when you're trying to get people on your side. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. So they're not just making the statement, going out and saying, he treated us really bad, just trust us on that. No, here's the list. And I believe the count is 27 of these, and some are short and some are long. And they cover the whole, they cover a lot of things. I kind of made they're kind of grouped into some broad categories. I called it something like governance, undermining representational government, being out of touch, harassing the people, using the military inappropriately to harass the people and cause problems, messing up trade and justice, issues with other colonies, and then some general overstepping bounds and just being a bad guy here. So we're going to go through those. here they are, because it's important you know the facts that were submitted to the candid world. And these aren't numbered. There's just a list. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the rights of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. Now, prior to this declaration, there was a number of, what do they call them? They called them the intolerable acts, and they were a number of acts that the king is. I don't want to say blamed, but or credited is not even right either. It's he is responsible for. These acts were things that ticked off the colonies quite a bit, certainly when they had no representation in Parliament. Now, I read about King George III, and he reigned for nearly 60 years in Great Britain, and he was involved in a lot of different things. He reigned from 1760 or so. Yeah, 1760 to 1820. So it was not nearly 60 years, and he's surpassed only by the Victorias. And he lived to be 80 something. So he had bouts with what appears to be mental illness, in particular mania. And he got old. He got old and what should I say? Ineffective or unable to maintain his. I mean, he had difficulty toward the end of his reign in the King Regent, who was his grandson, actually, his son. George IV was what do they call it? Prince Regent, or he was essentially acting as king toward the last decade or so. But King George III was there, and he had a very strong cabinet, I guess is the right word, and his advisors did a lot of the things that he is accused of doing. But that happens when it's hard to run a country without some advisors, and the man at the top is responsible, as they say. So he's playing fast and loose with doing the things he's supposed to do as king. All right, and this refusing to assent to laws, that's a problem, and not treating the colonies like he would treat other British citizens. That was a problem. The list goes on. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. So, and they did this. The local people would do something untoward. They would cause a problem somewhere, and the king, essentially, his what would you call them? His deputies would step in and remove a local magistrate, remove a governor, put somebody else in place, dissolve the local Congress, whatever it was, and then no action would be taken, and that's a sure way to make your citizenry who's already upset, get them more upset. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriation of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judicial powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. This does not sound like a good guy. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Now, those of you here in the States recognize that we have a military that sits under the commander-in-chief. And the commander-in-chief is a civilian position. The military is subordinate to the civil government. It does not sit independent of that. And to make the military independent and superior to the civil power is a thing that will rankle any American student of history, because it goes back to this idea that the military cannot be running around on its own. Without opposition. It's hard to fight against an army, and that's a problem that the colonists saw here. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. There were a number of cases prior to 1776, where there were skirmishes between colonists and the military, between the army, the Great Britain Army, and the troops were quartered oftentimes in local houses by force. Hi, this is Captain Smith and his aide-de-camp, or whoever it is, and he's going to be living with you. You have to feed him, provide him a room. And that violates all sorts of things people don't want, certainly if you're on the other side of that. And some of these people were put on trial for the skirmishes. The army people would be accused of wrongdoing in their station, but the trials were mock trials, and the punishments were not carried out properly. And so these are places where they saw this to be a problem. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Now, you list these lists here, at least these last three: taxes without consent, depriving us of trial by jury, and transporting us beyond the seas for pretended offenses. These will show up in the Bill of Rights. These are things that are going to be protected against doing, because this is the thing that they still didn't. 1776, 1789, 13 years later, they're still remembering these are problems. And this is a sure way to tick off your colonists. And part of the big issue is they did not have representation in Parliament, and they wanted representation. And I don't really understand the nature of British law, but I do know that was considered to be, these are citizens that did not have representation in Parliament, and that seems like a thing that was the kind of thing you didn't want to have. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and a fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule in these colonies. Now, this is a reference, and I had to look this up because I was unaware of exactly what this meant, and this is fascinating in its own right. This is a reference to the Act of, I think it's called the Act of Quebec in 1774. So after the 7 Years' War, Great Britain took control of parts of New France, which was essentially Canada. And there was and they renamed Canada into Quebec because that was the principal city, the capital city there. And the British took control of Canada there, and it included, like, keep in mind that the original 13 colonies, most of their colonial boundary, their western boundary, was the Appalachian Mountains. So there was a whole area west of the Appalachians, east of the Mississippi, that was not well defined. It was controlled by Great Britain, I think. And the question is, where do these colonies, where do the edges go? And people were going out there and moving in there, and to whom were they subject, and all those sorts of things. But Quebec, Great Britain took possession of Quebec and extended its boundaries all the way to the edge of the Mississippi River, which is it goes up into parts of Minnesota are east of the Mississippi, all of Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, all of that was considered now part of Quebec. So there were, and what happened is the Quebecers, they were in France, right? And now they come under British rule. And in Britain, one thing you have to do if you want to be in office is you have to swear loyalty to the king. And it turns out if you're French and you're in Quebec, you're probably a Catholic. And if you're a Brit, you are probably a Protestant. And if you're going to swear allegiance to the king, you have to swear allegiance to the church. And that was a problem if you were a Quebecer. And the great British government didn't want to have those guys want to join these rebellious, soon-to-be rebellious colonies. So they're kind of stuck. Do we hold fast and tough to these Quebecers and make them do things they don't want to do, or do we concede to their ways? And what happened is Great Britain conceded to their ways. They reinstituted French civil law. They allowed Catholics to have privilege that the Protestants didn't. They established a non-elected government. And like I said, they had the expansion of the original Quebec. They stretched it all the way out down to the north of the Ohio River, east of the Mississippi River, and all of that, like I said, that list of those places, those all became part of Quebec. And the other colonies now saw this, and they saw Quebec as this mammoth piece of this mammoth colony now that dwarfs all the other ones put together. And it was a problem. And they saw that as Great Britain establishing rules that violated the British rule. So it's interesting that Great Britain did a thing to bring Quebec into the fold, but in doing that, made it look like to the colonies in the Americas, in the North American area, that it made it look like they were getting special treatment, and they were actually getting stuff that they didn't deserve. All right, they didn't deserve or could make them a problem. So they said this is a difficult thing. You can't do this. If we're going to be British, we're going to be British, and if not, we're going to not be. And you can't just go and change these rules. You can't do that. This isn't going to work. Now it turns out a lot of that land after 1783, after the Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War, the areas east of the Mississippi and north of the Ohio, those became part of the Northwest Territory of the United States, and that was ceded to them. So the Great Lakes and most of the St. Lawrence River became the boundary between the United States and Canada. And what is always interesting to me is one of the fun historical facts from antiquity, or at least antiquity for the United States, is the Articles of Confederation, which set up the original government for the original federal government for the United States. And the Articles of Confederation, which came into being in 1777, had Article number 11, which says the following: Canada, acceding to this confederation and joining in the measures of the United States, shall be admitted into and entitled to all the advantages of this union, but no other colony shall be admitted into same unless such admission be agreed to by 9 states. So there was a provision in the Articles of Confederation that allowed Canada to come on in and join the team whenever they wanted. And that was in 1777. And the point of that article in the Articles of Confederation after the Revolutionary War was to try to bring into the fold the other big English colony on the continent. And so the U.S. had taken that piece of Quebec and had absorbed it into what's now Big Ten country, I guess you would call it. Well, until they expanded last year. But the Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, that area there, the Midwest, and the U.S. had taken that, and the other pieces north of the Great Lakes and north of the St. Lawrence River had become back to being Canada, and they wanted to allow those people to come in, and part of that was a way to get more population and to get a better control of the continent. But the other thing was that if you were a loyalist during the Revolutionary War, you when it was over, you had to go somewhere because if you were known to be a loyalist, it wasn't good for you. Okay, now it wasn't that they ran around and burned down all their houses, but some of them did. Some of the loyalists who quartered, who provided parties for the English and supported them when they were here, that was a no-no, and there was retribution that got paid. That's what people do, and so a lot of them went to Canada, and this was kind of an olive branch, kind of an opportunity to come back into the fold. And Canada could have done that with the stroke of a pen, but declined. And I can't blame them. The people there didn't want to be part of that. They wanted to be part of Great Britain, so they stayed. But the colonists didn't like the fact that Quebec got special treatment, and they were worried about that, and that's here in the Declaration. The list continues. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures, and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. Okay, that's a great one. So, you want to accuse somebody of doing something bad. That sounds like that's a list here of pretty much doing everything bad. That he has declared us out of his protection and waged war against us. And that's got to feel pretty bad. Okay, so here's your government. And, some people could argue that things like that are happening to them nowadays. When your government turns against you, that's a bad thing. And falling out of the protection of your government or having it wage war against you makes you feel like you're on the other team. Why should you hang around, right? He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with the circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. Wow. Okay. Sweet. Okay. Those are the Germans. Okay. So that the Brits and the Germans were, they got along real well, and there were mercenaries, military mercenaries that would do the bidding for Britain if they didn't have enough soldiers nearby. That was not an uncommon practice to hire people from other places to fight for you. And these guys were in charge of completing the circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. This is conscription of people captured. When you capture your opponents at war, and then you conscript them to fight for you. That's considered a bad thing, and these guys didn't like that. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So they were in cahoots. The Indian nations were anything but politically. How do I want to say this? They were anything but politically unsophisticated. They had a great knowledge of they didn't, the technology, they weren't very advanced, but I tell you, once they understood politics, they understood how civilizations work, they understood power, they understood which way the wind was blowing here and there, and they would choose sides based upon where they saw it to be best for them. And the British would engage with the local tribes to harass the colonists, if that was what they saw to be best for the British point of view. So all of these things, that's the end of the list. All of these things were reasons that we are breaking up with you. Now, they continue, or I guess they conclude this way. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attention to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They, too, have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. So, look, guys, we don't want to fight you. We tried to tell you this stuff was going on. It's been a problem, but you guys haven't spoken up on our behalf. And if we got to go to war with you, we got to go to war. But in times of war, we are enemies. But in times of peace, you are still our brethren. And what's interesting from our perspective is how that actually has come. Look at the close allyship between the U.S. and Great Britain over the last 150 years after the end of the War of 1812. So, the final paragraph. We, therefore, the representative of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's it. And then signed by 56 representatives, several from every colony, every state. Some names you probably know, some names you don't know. Ben Franklin's on there, and some of the Atom Boys from from Boston are there. And then some names you probably don't know unless you were related to them. This, of course, this declaration. Well, let me go back to one thing. So it is. This is the statement. Okay, so it starts off and it says, there's times when you got to break up, and this is going to be one of those times. But it's important that we tell you why, and we told you why. There's a list of 27 things, and he says, we tried. We sent you letters, we sent you notes, we tried to get along, and it didn't work. And we've even talked to our friends over there, and nobody's coming to bat for us. So we're going out on our own. We're breaking up. And therefore, we are and of right ought to be free and independent states. And it's it. It's over. We're done. We are done. And this is, it's kind of a civil war that actually worked. These guys actually made it out. The American Civil War has a similar thing as the southern states said, we're out. We want to be out. And Lincoln and his buddies said, no, you can't leave because that would violate a thing. And that one didn't work. So this is the nature. This is what's in the head when people talk about Americans. These are the ideas about the nature of government and the nature of political association that are in everybody's head. Right? This is one of the founding documents, and this is what is celebrated on Independence Day, and this is what will be celebrated on July 4th, 2026, as the semi-quincentennial. But look what they do at the end. They appeal to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intention. So please, God, make our intentions right and square. Make them like we are serious about this, and we know we're working really hard to make sure we're not overstepping our bounds. We are appealing to you to help us make sure we do these things right. And we're doing it in the name and by the authority of the people of the colonies, because they're the ones who elected their representatives. At the end, for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. They believed that there was a hand that was steering the ship, so to speak, that history was not just random events, but was directed toward a good. And the last thing to do is those of us who have signed this realize that this is a dangerous thing we're doing. But we put on the line, everybody put on the line here their lives, fortune, and sacred honor. And it cost. This Revolutionary War went from 1775 or so, when you start there at Concord and Lexington, all the way up to 1783 with the Treaty of Paris, or even at least if you want to, maybe you could stop it at Yorktown in 1781. This was not 7 years of happy-go-lucky times. This was a difficult thing, and a lot of these guys lost their lives. They lost their fortunes, but they trusted that their honor was still intact, their sacred honor. This was, of course, an act of treason. It was a way of saying, no, we are no longer subjects of the king. That has all been split off. And not everyone in the colonies was a rebel. They were not all patriots. Their estimates in, 40 to 45% of the overall population of the free white population. These are the ones who get to vote. That they were 40 to 45% were patriots. They were on the rebel side. Another 15 to 20% were loyalists, and then there was about a third, 35 to 45% maybe, that were sitting the fence. They were trying to see which way it was going to go. They didn't. They probably didn't care. They said, I don't know. I have a cobbler shop I have to run, or I have farms that I have to, I got to get the harvest in. I can't be worrying about these kinds of things. And of course, this varied a lot across different regions. To the north in New England, they were highly pro-independence. Places like New York City, Georgia, the Carolinas were very much more loyalist. During the British armies granted to enslaved slaves, they would grant them their freedom if they came and fought for the British, which was an interesting thing. The British were able to get King George III was able to end slavery in the empire in 1807 or so, and it took another 50 some years for that to take hold in the States. So this is there were a lot of different political things at play there. Any form of government, any form of government can be good or bad. In the U.S., we are trained to hate kings. Everybody talks. There's a lot of discussion. Well, you're not my king, but monarchies can be good if you have a good king. They can be bad if you have a bad king. And oligarchies are great if you have wise men, and they're bad if those men get corrupted and privileged. Democracies are great because they have equal stations, but they can be bad because of mob rule. That can be a problem. There's a famous quote from our buddy James Madison, who says, "Democracy. It is such that democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Democracies, you will note that there's no discussion calling for democracy in our Declaration of Independence, nor in our Constitution. Democracy is not a desired thing because it can devolve into mob rule. Republics can be good because we rely on the rule of law, but of course, corruption and bad justice can take them down as well. All governments can be victims of a lack of virtue. And I think where we are now is we see that societal ills, wherever they are a result of poor moral formation. This is not a system of government that can be implemented by a nation of moral delinquents. We are called to be virtuous. We are called to do the right thing. We're called to form our consciences to do that. We are appealing to the supreme judge of the world for rectitude of our intentions. Self-government is a difficult thing. We have people that can't even return their shopping carts to the shopping cart corral in the parking lot. And we are trying to self-govern ourselves. It's a difficult thing. But freedom is a thing that we have been given. We talked a couple weeks ago about Adam and Eve in the garden and what they did with their freedom, how easily they were tricked, and how sin can be alluring. What did they say? Pleasing to the eye, good for food, and good to make one wise, something like that. But it can be tempting. You have to be very careful with your freedom if it is not rightly aligned. So I will leave you at that. I will say, I would encourage you to enjoy your 4th of July spectacle. We will have an off week next week, and then we will be back at it the week after that. And we will be celebrating here. We were looking with trepidation and hope toward the future, and we hope that there will be another 250 years before we get to our quincentennial in the year 2276. In the meantime, there's plenty for you to do. Seek the good, live virtuously, and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life.
It's going to be a great day.